Ramping up the military budget, China says it's seeking peace through strength. Is Beijing being increasingly assertive in a tense region? And how much of a concern is China's growing military power? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Turning pledges into policy, China announces sweeping reforms at the opening of its annual parliamentary session, and it's unveiled a huge boost to its defense budget, increasing it by 12.2%. As Rob McBride now reports, it's the biggest military hike in 3 years, making China's military spending now second only to the United States.
Opening this parliamentary session, China's leaders seem determined to develop the kind of military machine that befits the world's second biggest economy. As delegates gathered, it was announced military spending would increase by 12%. That's despite the current national drive to save money.
Last year, we made solid progress in strengthening national defense. This has increased our military capacity.
The extra budget will be used to modernize China's armed forces, raise living standards among service personnel, and develop more capabilities to fight what the government calls terrorism and natural disasters. The United States has announced recently that it's cutting back its armed forces, but its military spending still outranks China's. And the prospect of a rapidly expanding military will cause alarm with China's neighbors. Japan, in particular, is locked in a territorial dispute with China and recently announced its own 3% rise in military spending. But economic and social reform will also dominate the coming days of deliberation, with a commitment to continue China's current 7.5% growth rate.
Ultimately, stable growth will ensure that urban and rural incomes increase and people's lives improve.
With a promise to bring millions more people out of poverty, the government says it will do so while tackling the double downsides of pollution and corruption.
I think China needs to change its economic growth pattern. We cannot sacrifice the environment for economic growth.
Many of these delegates are from regions still waiting for their share of China's economic success, making sure they get it without widening the wealth gap, encouraging more corruption, or creating too much pollution. Those are the challenges now facing the Chinese leadership. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, at the Great Hall of the People, Beijing.
Well, Beijing's defense spending could match that of the US by the 2030s. But the big focus for China is improving its capabilities and expertise so that it can match its superpower rival. What does that mean? The number of active army personnel, 1.6 million, stayed the same between 2012 and 2013, while the number of Navy personnel decreased from just over 255,000 to 235,000. That's in line with the percentage of money spent on personnel. China's personnel costs account for just 30% of its total military budget. The same figure is 44% for Japan and 45% for India. So where is the money going? Well, China is spending more money on procurement. It's increased the number of its submarines from 61 to 70, and it's seen a big increase in the number of its combat aircraft from 1,903 to 2,193. Well, now let's bring in our guests. In Beijing, Willem van Kemenade, China analyst and author of the book China, Hong Kong, Taiwan Inc. The Dynamics of a New Empire. In London, Roderick Wai, associate fellow with the Asia program at Chatham House. And in Washington, D.C., Bonnie Glaser, senior advisor for Asia in the Freeman Chair in China Studies. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Willem van Kemenade in Beijing. Is this increase in defense spending a surprise?
Not at all. There has been a regular annual increase. The increase this year is over 12%. That's a bit more than last year. But the unique thing of China's defense expenditure, it's always the final amount without any specification. So you don't know exactly what it is for. And experts, international experts, always guess that the real expenditure is much higher. Some say as much as 50% higher.
Well, Bonnie Glaser, your view about the size of this increase? We have seen regular increases in military spending before, just not in recent years, though. Is there something unusual in this, do you believe?
No, I don't. Under Jiang Zemin, the annual average increase was over 16%. Under Hu Jintao and his 10-year rule, the average annual increase was 15%. So this year's 12% increase, yes, a little bit more than last year, but China's economy continues to grow. Therefore, defense spending continues to grow. China's defense spending is somewhere between 1.5% and 2% of its GDP, which is still considerably less than the United States. Of course, in absolute terms, it's a large economy, and so it's a large amount. But I do agree that China is not very transparent about how it allocates these funds. What is it spending on personnel? What is it spending on procurement and other parts of the military budget? And there are things that China excludes from the military budget as well.
Well, we're going to get onto that particular point, particularly that of domestic security, in a little while. But let's just go to Roderick Wai in London to discuss this point of transparency, which both our guests have already brought out, that the speculation is that the defense spending is actually much higher than what we see in the budget. Your view?
It has always been estimated that China's real defence spending is considerably greater than what we see in the budget, and that is always going to be the case. China talks a little bit about transparency, but actually expenditure on military programs remains highly secretive. Exactly what the Chinese are developing remains state secret. So we know not very much about what the key elements of China's military development are, but we do know that the expenditure is going to increase regularly. I mean, China has made a clear commitment to itself for that.
Willem van Kemenade, what we have heard from the Chinese leadership is the intent to modernize, the intention to create technological advances within the army, within the Navy, within the Air Force. We've seen the increase in number of fighter jets, for example. This is part of a wider process, is it? Not just modernizing an economy, but also modernizing a defense force as part of this process.
Oh, definitely. Well, China's broad general goal is to become a global power with a blue water navy with global reach. That's in the first place. And the goal of China is, you know, the former Soviet Union, Russia, has its near abroad problem. China has its nearby sea problem. It wants to reduce and eventually remove the large-scale US presence from its nearby seas. Therefore, it has introduced its first aircraft carrier and recently announced that it will build a second one. And to counter the movement of American aircraft carriers, it has developed a missile that has already led to the American decision to stay away from too close near the Chinese coast, particularly from the Taiwan Straits. And well, and then there is China's development of a stealth fighter, which was presented during a visit of the former Defense Secretary Gates, Thomas Gates, and Robert Gates, sorry, and. So yeah, there is introduction of new, highly advanced hardware on all fronts.
Well, Roderick Wai, you brought up that point about, well, there's always been a lack of transparency. It's not quite clear exactly what is being developed within the Chinese military. But one thing that we do know is that aircraft carrier that was referred to, an old Ukrainian vessel which is being retrofitted. But certainly this would appear to be more smoke and mirrors in this particular case than actual military or naval threat on the waters, would it not?
In that particular case, probably yes, because not only is it an old vessel retrofitted, but it takes a lot of practice and experience to properly operate a carrier group in an operational sense, and China is still a considerable way off that. But I think what we are going to continue to see is a regular upgrading of Chinese military capabilities. As the Chinese economy gets stronger, they will have more that they are able to devote to defense. And for China's international view of its own international standing, it is important that it has a military capabilities consistent with that of a serious power.
Well, Bonnie Glaser, we hear the linkage between economic development and the size of the military. Economic growth at the moment, the target, at least according to the Prime Minister, 7.5%. Yet up until a year ago, many would argue that unless China gets double-digit growth with the speed at which it is developing and needs to develop, it is going to be left behind. Is there a contradiction between increasing the strength of its military and economic development, or is it part of the same thing?
Well, I think that the two are obviously connected. Chinese leaders have come to understand that the quality of economic growth is more important than the rapid pace of economic growth. The Chinese face many domestic challenges, the growing urban-rural income gap, for example, environmental problems, very heavy debt. And they recognize that growth is going to slow a bit while they readjust their economy to rely less on investment in particular and more on domestic consumption. At the same time, they are trying to keep growth rates at 7.5%. There are some economists who think that that will be a bit challenging, that they may actually dip even slower. But I think that we'll probably see the military spending continue to be about the same percentage of GDP growth. That is, it's 1.5% of the official announced defense budget, but believed to be probably around 2% or maybe even a little higher. I'd like to just add something to one of the other speakers' comments, and that is that the counter-intervention strategy that China has in its near seas is, of course, only in wartime. In peacetime, China is not seeking to bar the United States from operations in most of the seas, the exception, of course, being its 200-mile EEZ, where it's interfering with some of U.S. surveillance operations. And the United States continues to sail in all of these seas, including in the Taiwan Strait, where it conducts regular freedom of navigation missions.
Well, at this point, let's just take a look at the geopolitical situation. China's growing military power is making many of its rivals nervous. Beijing and Tokyo are engaged in an increasingly tense dispute over the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Japan controls the islands, but China claims them. And of course, the continued policing of the East China Sea by the US for Japan isn't doing much to mend already tense relations between the superpowers. China is also involved in maritime disputes with several other neighbors, including the Philippines and Vietnam. And one-time Cold War rivals Russia and China have pledged to strengthen their cooperation on foreign policy, but border tensions periodically reappear. Well, just to stay with you, Bonnie Glaser, some have described this increase in spending as a sign of China's determination to reposition itself strategically, to improve its strategic positioning. Now, you are contending that this is wartime postures, this is not necessarily what China is looking at on a day-to-day basis?
Well, surely China has reason to have a strong military in peacetime. It might have to conduct evacuation operations, as it did of its own people, over 30,000 of them in Libya. It conducts military diplomacy. It's even involved in the Gulf of Aden in anti-piracy operations. That is certainly true. China has enunciated its leader, Xi Jinping, the Chinese dream, which is the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, to restore China to its rightful place in the world. And that includes having a strong military. But I think the real concern of the international community should not just be the amount that China is spending on its military, but it's how it's using its military, and I would add its law enforcement ships, its Coast Guard, which it is at times using to intimidate and bully its neighbors, including Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. So I think that more needs to be done by the international community. One, certainly to promote China to be more transparent about how it's spending this money, but really secondly, to engage China in serious discussions about code of conduct, operational safety, and ways to ensure that China will observe international laws and norms and be more of a positive contributor to peace and security in its region as well as globally.
Well, Roderick, why, staying with that particular point, what we haven't mentioned yet is the domestic security budget, quite simply because it's not clearly known. It is done on a regional basis rather than national. Not great clarity about what is a massive budget, one of domestic security. Is this intentionally kept underneath the wraps?
Nothing in China, nothing on that sort of scale is done accidentally. Of course, China doesn't want to broadcast too openly the extent of its spending on domestic security, but it is believed to be at least equal to that on sort of major, if you like, external defence. Internal security covers a vast range of different things, from normal policing to China's control, exercising its control in Tibet and in Xinjiang, to policing of dissidents. There's a whole range of activities that come under that national domestic security agenda. And of course, for the Chinese leadership, maintaining control in China and maintaining the party's power is if not the most important single goal that they seek to achieve. So it is no surprise that spending on domestic security is big and substantial and is likely to remain so.
Well, Willem van Kemenade, let's just broaden this out a little bit. We are now seeing a year of Xi Jinping being in power, the modernizer, the once-in-a-decade change in leadership that we saw at the beginning of last year. Here we've got the beginning of the parliamentary session. Here we see a military budget. Is there a change? Is the reform-minded leader all that he pledged to be?
Well, there is speculation that Xi Jinping has given the military a freer hand because, well, he wants to support in consolidating his own political position as General Secretary and as Head of State. And therefore, the assumption is that there is a shift towards a more hardline policy. Hardline generals, many of them young, are free to advocate hardline views in the media, and this all leads to speculation that China is indeed adopting more hardline policies in the East China Sea with Japan, in the South China Sea with the Philippines and Vietnam, and with India, and at the same time, expanding its presence, its naval presence worldwide, as far as the Magellan Strait in the southern tip of Latin America.
Roderick, why, your view on that particular point, is the political leadership looking to the military for support? Is the payouts of the budgets part of an internal solidifying of a political base by getting or ensuring military support?
Xi Jinping has been probably more successful, certainly than his predecessors, in establishing his control over the Chinese political system more quickly and more thoroughly. We saw a couple of years ago now the Bo Xilai case, and we are now hearing about the possibility of the public disgrace of a former Politburo Standing Committee, Zhou Yungang. Now, to achieve sort of political dominance dominance, he needs to get political supporters. One of the key institutions in China is the military, and he certainly seems to have an effective working relationship with the military. How much he is allowing the military their head, encouraging hawkish behaviour, I think is a matter of debate. Personally, I don't see it that much. You hear certainly hawkish military voices, but you hear those in many places, and what we are hearing from China increasingly is different voices, not simply the single voice of the central leadership.
Well, Bonnie Glaser, on that particular point, not simply the single voice of the central leadership, do you believe that what is happening, or what has happening in the short year that Xi Jinping has been in power, is perhaps an increasing breadth of the political debate, the national debate within China, as to what kind of a country it is going to be in the future?
Well, I think that there is a great deal of debate in China, and there are many constituencies and interest groups, and Xi Jinping really has to contend with all of them. We have state-owned enterprises that are fighting to maintain their position. There is public opinion, which has been educated and influenced to actually support a much harder line abroad. There's certainly public opinion complaining about some of the domestic policies as well. And then there are, of course, I think even different voices within the military. But I think that overall, we have a growing view in China that the time has come to stand up for Chinese interests, to right the wrongs of the past. And the Chinese people have been educated, inculcated to remember the century of national humiliation that dates back to the Opium War, the invasion and mistreatment of China by foreigners, including many countries, but particularly Japan. And so there really is a shared desire to stand up for and defend Chinese interests. And this is not something that is just pushed by the military, but is really pressed by almost all of the constituencies in China. And Xi Jinping wants to use this nationalist fervor to strengthen, consolidate his position, but he also has to channel it appropriately. And I think that that will be a difficult path for him to pursue in the future.
Willem van Kemenade, very quickly, your view on that particular contention, the need to channel national fervor while developing it at the same time?
Well, Xi Jinping has invested a great deal in an anti-corruption campaign, more draconian than any of them before. And, well, as the other speaker said, a standing committee Politburo member, a former one, Zhou Yongkang, has been put under a form of house arrest. His son has been arrested. The general concern is that if China doesn't tackle corruption more seriously and in a more draconian way, China will perish. And the other side of the coin is that if the corruption is handled too fiercely, that the Communist Party will perish.
Well, Roderick, why, very quickly, your view on that, the dilemma facing Xi Jinping after his year in power, to get rid of corruption, yet to retain all the political controls and support, including that of the army.
It's a problem. You can only go so far in pursuing corruption, because corruption actually reaches the highest levels in China, and it is not possible to completely root it out without seriously damaging the foundations of the party state. So yes, there are dilemmas, there are political dilemmas, there are all the economic and social problems that Bonnie Glaser was referring to. China is not an easy place to govern, but what we are seeing is an increasingly confident China, China that has grown economically, that feels that it does now have the chance to take its rightful place in the world and to put right some of the wrongs that it feels that it's been done to it over the years.
Well, at that point, many thanks to my guests, Willem van Kemenade, Roderick Y, and Bonnie Glaser. And why not join in this discussion online? Leave us your thoughts and comments at Facebook or Twitter. I'm Mike Hanna. Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.